We chatted for a few more minutes, but the smiles on my husband and mother-in-law's faces slowly disappeared. "Laura, are you okay?" my husband asked, his tone shifting. "What?" I replied, caught off guard. "Never mind," I added quickly, brushing it off. But I could sense my husband's impatience. It felt like he was up to something. Just then, my mother-in-law abruptly stood up, clutching her stomach. "Ouch! Oh no," she exclaimed, rushing to the bathroom. "Mom, what's happening? Are you okay?" my husband called out, alarmed. "Why is my stomach hurting so much?" "This can't be. Laura, did you switch the tea?" she demanded. "I did," I admitted. "I switched it with your mother." "Why on earth would you do that?" My husband cut me off. "What's the problem if I did?" I retorted. "My name is Laura. I'm a 30-year-old office worker, and I've been married to my husband Joshua for 2 years. We met through work. He joined the company mid-career from a client I was managing. At first, he struggled to adjust to the new environment, but the next time I saw him, he had adapted remarkably well. I thought he was a clever man. As we spent more time together, we grew closer, going on dates and sharing meals. Eventually, he confessed his feelings, and we began dating officially. Our relationship progressed smoothly, and soon after, he proposed and we got married. In the beginning, our newlywed life felt perfect. Joshua isn't much of a cook, so I took charge of the kitchen, while he handled the cleaning and laundry. He even took out the trash without needing to be asked, something I really appreciated. But lately, something has changed in him. His attitude toward me has shifted. He used to follow me everywhere, craving my attention like a puppy. I often had to remind him to be patient, but now, that eagerness has vanished. The sweet tone he once used has been replaced with a distant coolness. "What's for dinner?" he asked one evening, his voice devoid of enthusiasm. "Hamburgers, your favorite," I replied. "Okay," was all he said, barely acknowledging my effort. It stung. I'd gone out of my way to make something he loves, and yet his reaction was so indifferent. He used to be so affectionate. I wonder if he'll ever be that way with me again. It's not just Joshua that's been troubling me. My mother-in-law has been a source of stress since the start of our marriage. "Laura, why didn't you prepare any snacks?" she once complained. "I'm sorry, but you dropped by unannounced," I explained. "Still, you should always be prepared," she snapped back, always finding fault with me. "No, that can't be." Up until recently, my husband had always defended me, standing up to my mother-in-law whenever she criticized me. But now, he started to join her in picking on me. "I really don't think Laura is considerate, do you?" he asked her one day. "It's a wife's duty to always be prepared when my mother comes over," she chimed in. "If you keep this up, you never know when I might leave you," he added, threatening divorce in a way that felt so unlike him. His change in behavior left me feeling hurt and confused. I still wanted to believe in him, but sadness weighed heavily on me. Then, one weekend, something strange happened. My mother-in-law came to visit, bringing with her an expensive-looking tea and some sweets. She seemed unusually cheerful as she offered them to me. "I went out of my way to find the finest tea today. Let's enjoy it together," she said with an unusually warm smile. There was something off about her sudden kindness, but I couldn't quite figure out what. My husband then offered to make the tea himself, which was odd given that he'd been so demanding of me lately. "Thank you, Mother. I'll make the tea today," he said, surprising me. Usually, he would have ordered me to hurry up and prepare the table for his mother. So why was he being so nice today? I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling growing inside me. He handed me a cup of tea with a grin, and my mother-in-law leaned in to inhale its aroma. "Wow, it smells amazing," she said, her nose almost touching the cup. I hesitated and sniffed my tea. It smelled like regular tea, but something seemed off. There were tiny bubbles floating on the surface, definitely not normal. This isn't right, I thought. I shouldn't drink this, but what can I do? How can I swap this tea without them noticing? Then an idea struck me. "Mother-in-law, your favorite Korean singer was on a music show the other night. I recorded it for you if you'd like to watch." Her eyes lit up. "Oh really? I'd love to see it. I'll watch it right away." As she reached for the remote control, I turned to my husband. "Didn't you prepare any snacks? You made the tea, but forgot the snacks." He bristled at the suggestion. He hated being told he overlooked something. "I was just about to do that," he muttered, heading to the kitchen to grab plates and snacks. Seizing the opportunity, I quickly swapped my tea with my mother-in-law's. They returned to the table, none the wiser. "Well, let's enjoy this fine tea, shall we?" my mother-in-law said, lifting her cup. "Yes, it's a special one," my husband added. They both sipped their tea, eyes fixed on me as I cautiously tasted mine. "It definitely has a different flavor," I remarked. My husband and mother-in-law exchanged knowing grins. "I know, right? It's unique," she said, laughing. "Yeah, it's delicious," my husband added, their laughter filling the room. They seemed so pleased with themselves, clearly expecting a reaction from me. I could only think, they must have put something in this tea. But I smiled and said, "Yes, it's very good," before finishing my cup. Their grins remained, but as the minutes passed, their smiles began to wane. "Laura, are you feeling okay?" my husband asked, his tone more urgent now. "What?" I responded, feigning ignorance. "Nothing, never mind," I said, watching his impatience grow. He must have planned something, but then suddenly my mother-in-law shot up from her seat, clutching her stomach. "Ouch! Oh," she cried out, rushing to the bathroom. "Mom, what's wrong? Why is my stomach hurting so much?" "Oh no, no way," my husband stammered, panic creeping into his voice. "Laura, you didn't switch the tea, did you?" "I switched mine with your mother's," I said, watching the color drain from my husband's face. "What? Why would you do that?" he asked, panic evident in his voice. "Why not? Was there something wrong with the tea you served me? Does that mean you put something harmful in it?" He stammered, "No, it's just that." "Tell me the truth, or you won't be able to handle what's happening to your mother right now. This could be serious." Realizing he had no other choice, he confessed, "I put a large amount of powdered laxative in your tea." My eyes widened in shock. "Are you out of your mind? Of course, she have an upset stomach, and in large quantities it could be dangerous, even fatal." His face turned ashen. "Really? Oh no, call an ambulance." Without hesitation, I dialed emergency services, and soon my mother-in-law was being rushed to the hospital, my husband frantic as he followed her out the door. Once they were gone, I took the tea he had laced with laxatives and carefully poured it into a water bottle. I knew I needed to keep it as evidence. "I'll take this to the police and file a report," I decided. While my husband and mother-in-law were at the hospital, I packed up my belongings, knowing it was time to leave this toxic situation behind. I called my parents and asked them to help me move my belongings. Once everything was packed up, I headed to their house. Shortly after arriving, my phone rang. It was my husband. "My mom's in bad shape," he began, his voice strained. "She has to stay in the hospital for a few days, so I need you to bring her a change of clothes and some other things, okay?" I was stunned by his request. "What? Are you serious? I'm not doing that." "Hey, you can't just refuse. My mom's in trouble. You're my wife. You should at least do that." "I can't do this anymore," I said firmly. "I'm divorcing you." He was silent for a moment before responding, "Divorce? I see. If you're insisting on a divorce, then I guess I have no choice. But since you're the one asking for it, don't expect a share of our property." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What are you talking about? This is on you. You're the reason I'm filing for divorce, and I'll take what's rightfully mine." "Don't be ridiculous. You won't get a dime from me. The divorce was your idea. This isn't my fault." His words made my skin crawl. "You're delusional. You tried to force me to drink a cup of laxative tea. How can you possibly think you're not at fault?" I wanted to remind him that I had solid evidence against him, but before I could say anything, he abruptly hung up. "Fine. I thought I have plenty to do, like finding a lawyer. I'll deal with him later." In the days that followed, my husband bombarded me with messages, demanding to know why I'd taken all my belongings and accusing me of abandoning the house. He even complained that the place was falling apart without me to do the chores. "Didn't you say you wanted a divorce?" I texted back. "You'll have to take care of the house on your own once it's finalized." I had so many things I wanted to say to him, but I held back until I had secured a lawyer. Then, not long after my mother-in-law was discharged from a hospital, my husband and his parents showed up at my parents' house. Their expressions were grim. "Divorce is out of the question," my husband announced arrogantly, "but I'll comply if I must. You didn't even visit my mom in the hospital after what happened, and then you just left, taking all your things. How can I stay married to someone like that?" My mother-in-law shot me a nasty look, and it was clear they only told their side of the story to my father-in-law, who seemed to believe them. "Laura," my father-in-law began, "I think you're being a little selfish." I almost laughed at the irony. My father-in-law was the only sane person in that family, and I knew he would see things differently if he heard the whole story. I took out my phone and played an audio clip for everyone to hear. I had actually planted a large amount of powdered laxative in Laura's tea, my husband's voice confessed. The room fell silent as the gravity of the evidence sank in. My husband and mother-in-law's faces drained of color, their earlier bravado evaporating. "How did that conversation come about?" my husband stammered, realizing he had unwittingly sealed his own fate. "Father," I began, turning to my father-in-law, I felt I was in danger. I quickly switched my tea with my mother-in-law's. Moments later, she started suffering from stomach pains. She has always bullied me, and though Joshua used to defend me, recently, they've been ganging up on me. This time, he crossed the line. My father-in-law's face turned crimson with anger as he glared at my husband and mother-in-law. "Joshua, what's going on? Were you really bullying her too?" Caught off guard, they both struggled to explain themselves. "No, wait, Dad, it was just a joke," my husband stammered. "Laura wasn't feeling well, so I thought it'd be funny to mess with her tea. It was just a harmless prank. I wasn't bullying her. And I was just playing around," my mother-in-law chimed in. "It wasn't bullying." My father-in-law wasn't buying it. "Whether you think it's a joke or not, this kind of behavior is unacceptable. Do you really think you can get away with this?" I took a deep breath, knowing I had one more card to play. "This explains why Joshua's been so terrible to me," I said, reaching into my bag and pulling out an envelope. I spread its contents, photographs, across the table. My husband's face turned even paler as he recognized the images. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" I continued, my voice steady. "Your behavior was so suspicious that I hired a private investigator. I didn't want to believe you were having an affair, but the evidence speaks for itself. You were probably hoping to push me into asking for a divorce first, weren't you?" My husband was sweating now, visibly shaken. He knew I had him cornered. I reached into my bag once more and produced the divorce papers, placing them in front of him. "No matter how foolish you are, you must realize that in this situation you have no advantage. Sign these, and maybe we can avoid making this even messier." He stared at the papers, his hands trembling, as the reality of his situation finally set in. "Of course, I'll be seeking alimony, and I expect a fair share of the property. And just so you know, I'll be reporting you for assault for planting the laxative," I said, my voice steady. My husband's eyes widened in panic. "The police? Wait, don't you feel any sympathy for Joshua?" "Sympathy? For what?" I retorted. "It's not just Joshua who's at fault. You're just as guilty, mother-in-law. He was working with you." "Wait a minute. Why should I be arrested?" "It was Joshua who put the laxative in the tea," she protested. "Mom, you were part of the scheme. Don't try to shift the blame entirely onto him." "What? You think I helped because you found a new potential husband?" she shot back. As my husband and mother-in-law began arguing, neither willing to take responsibility, my father-in-law finally had enough. "Enough," he bellowed. "You both committed a crime. Take responsibility for your actions, and Joshua, you need to own up to the affair. You're to pay Laura the alimony she deserves, and she will get her share of the property." The force of my father-in-law's anger left my husband and mother-in-law stunned. I was relieved he stepped in because my own father was on the verge of losing his temper as well. "Let's handle the rest through the lawyers," I said. "Get these divorce papers signed immediately." My husband hesitated, but after another round of yelling from my father-in-law, he begrudgingly signed the documents. "I'm truly sorry for the trouble my son and my wife have caused you," my father-in-law said, offering his apology as he took my husband and mother-in-law home. With the divorce finalized, I moved forward with my legal actions. I filed for alimony against my ex-husband and his affair partner, receiving $30,000 from each. I also reported my ex-husband and mother-in-law for assault, submitting the audio recording and the tea as evidence. Both were arrested and fined. In an unexpected turn, my ex-father-in-law, repulsed by the chaos caused by my ex-mother-in-law, asked for a divorce from her. She ended up having to fend for herself, working part-time at a low-paying job to cover the fines. As for my ex-husband, his affair partner was furious with him for lying and causing so much trouble. After a heated confrontation, she demanded alimony. He ended up borrowing money from a consumer loan to pay her off in one lump sum. Soon after, she disappeared, leaving him with a massive debt. In the end, my ex-husband found himself abandoned by both me and his affair partner, burdened with debt and facing the consequences of his actions. It was a fitting outcome for his betrayal. On the bright side, I achieved what I set out to do. I secured my fair share of the property and am now living comfortably on my own in a new apartment. I've been working hard and recently received a well-deserved promotion. To celebrate, I'm planning a trip with friends or perhaps with my parents. It's important to remember that intentionally poisoning someone's tea with laxatives is a serious crime, not a prank. My husband and mother-in-law's actions were far from harmless, and they deserve to face the consequences for their actions. Thankfully, my father-in-law proved to be a decent person who understood my situation, which was a small comfort amidst the chaos. Despite the disaster that unfolded, I'm hopeful for the future. I'm looking forward to finding someone who truly appreciates and respects me. For now, I'm focusing on enjoying my newfound independence and the positive changes in my life. Sarah is completely useless in the kitchen, Jake declared, causing the room to grow icy as everyone's eyes shifted toward me. Bolstered by their reaction, Jake's voice grew louder. Have you ever tasted a meal I've made, or are all your meals eaten at your lover's house? I took a deep breath and held up the documents that proved Jake's infidelity. This is no joke, I said firmly, pointing to the evidence in my in-law's hands. My name is Sarah. I'm 35 years old and I've always been somewhat intimidated by assertive men, to the point where I felt afraid. Because of this, I rarely dated and had few interactions with men. As I approached 40, my concerned parents suggested an arranged marriage. Initially, I refused, but given my limited dating experiences and their persistence, I agreed to a few matchmaking sessions. It was at one of these sessions that I met Jake. He was kind, serious, and straightforward, a successful employee at a major company. Despite his imposing physique, he didn't intimidate me at all. The matchmaking went smoothly, and soon we were planning our marriage and meeting his parents. Jake's family was well known in the equestrian world, running their own farm. His father was a man of few words, while his mother was elegant and gentle with charming dimples that appeared when she smiled. Before I knew it, Jake and I were set to marry. As part of the agreement, I became a full-time housewife and left my clerical job at the electronics company. My colleagues teased me about marrying into wealth, and my parents were thrilled. Looking back, I believe that was the peak of my happiness. Jake had assured me that his demanding job would keep him away often, but he promised it would only be for a while. He planned to support the family business after achieving his career goals. I admired his dedication and decided to support him. However, as the years passed, Jake's absences became more frequent and prolonged. I knew he wouldn't be home often, but not to this extent. I waited alone in our condo, a wedding gift from his parents. I wondered if he'd even come home that night. I had only managed to cook for him a few times as his returns were so rare and unpredictable. His business trips left the house empty for days, and he would often dine out, returning home late at night. Despite his late returns, Jake would wake up early and leave without breakfast, which worried me. I was concerned about his health and well-being. One morning, as Jake prepared for the day, I asked, "Jake, I really want you to eat healthy meals. Why don't you eat at home?" He didn't meet my gaze, busy adjusting his tie. "Don't worry, work is just particularly demanding right now," he replied briefly before leaving. Jake worked from early morning until late at night, including weekends and holidays, with frequent business travels. Initially, I wondered if he was avoiding me or if something was wrong between us. His constant absence made me feel almost like I was living alone. Jake owned very few personal items, which added to the feeling of solitude. We hardly spoke, so I knew almost nothing about his interests or preferences. Sometimes, I questioned if I was at fault. I spoke to my parents, but they simply said that it was better for a man to be busy. My few friends also thought it was ideal for a husband to be occupied without deeply considering my feelings. Although Jake managed our finances well and provided for our daily needs, which meant I had no financial worries, this stability only seemed to heighten my anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was to blame for Jake's distance, constantly wondering if I had done something to drive him away. My sense of inadequacy as a wife consumed me, leading me to obsess over cleaning and improving my cooking skills during the rare moments we were together. Whenever Jake noticed my anxious expression, he would reassure me, saying, "Sarah, you're doing everything right." Reluctantly, I came to accept that this might be the norm for our marriage. Then, at the end of the year, I received an unexpected call from my father-in-law. His angry voice wooed from the other end of the line, causing me to nearly drop the phone. "Sarah, what on earth do you think you're doing?" he demanded. "Why haven't you attended the family gathering?" Confused, I asked, "What do you mean? Has something happened?" "Don't play dumb," he scolded. "Why haven't you come to the family gatherings every year?" I was taken aback. I had never been informed of any annual family events. I recalled discussing Christmas greetings with Jake, who had mentioned that his father preferred not to have many people in his house and that family gatherings were kept to a minimum. He had also said that it was too hectic with too many relatives, so each year, only Jake would visit his parents with Christmas gifts. "You should at least apologize for not participating," his father said sternly, making me tremble. I had always stayed home during Christmas while Jake visited his parents, careful to send warm greetings and messages to maintain proper etiquette. I had suggested making a phone call, but Jake said it was a busy time and that it wasn't necessary. I was relieved to avoid confronting my strict father-in-law, but felt a pang of guilt as I learned that all the relatives gathered for a Christmas party. I apologized profusely over the phone, but my father-in-law left a harsh remark before ending the call. My mind was filled with doubts. What did Jake mean by saying it was no problem if I didn't participate? Why did he convey the wrong information about the family gathering? Did he not want me to attend at all? That night, when Jake returned home, I decided to confront him. "I received a call from your father today," I said. "He scolded me for not attending the Christmas party." Jake gave a rueful smile, sighed, and replied, "It can be stressful to go where there are many people. Wives usually don't want to visit their in-laws' homes, and I was just considering your feelings." I was surprised by Jake's thoughtfulness. I knew many people dread visiting their spouse's family, as my friends often complain, but that didn't mean they never attended. Despite Jake's insistence that it was okay to skip the gathering, I felt compelled to attend this year and overruled him. The Christmas gathering at his family's home was lavish, with numerous relatives exchanging greetings and gifts. "You finally showed up as a member of the family," my father-in-law said coldly. "It's only natural to participate in such events." Even after I explained that I had been told there was no gathering, his anger didn't subside. "Were you avoiding us because you don't like seeing everyone here?" His intense anger left me speechless, and I had no energy left to argue. The relatives watched from a distance, their silent scrutiny understandable. I chose to endure the situation patiently, but I couldn't forgive Jake for his complete lack of support. He continued to drink silently, and as time went on, his alcohol consumption increased. Meanwhile, everyone came to me to voice their grievances. "Jake says he's never seen you working around the house," they complained. I wanted to retort that Jake was rarely home, and that when I did cook, it was often after he had already eaten out. Each complaint from the relatives felt like a stab in the heart. What kind of negative stories was Jake sharing about me? I couldn't understand why he was painting such a bleak picture. My only response to their harsh words was a stiff apology. "I'm sorry. I will be more mindful from now on," I said, trying to maintain my composure amid their piercing stares. I did my best to assist with the cooking and serving during the Christmas party, and after the cleanup the next day, I was completely exhausted. Jake went straight to work from his parents' house, and we spent the day apart. Returning home, I took a deep breath and reflected on the strange situation. Why had Jake claimed there was no family gathering? Why was he telling people that I neglected household chores? Was this related to his frequent absences? My concerns grew, and I felt I had to investigate further. With time on my hands, I decided to track Jake's behavior, a practice I had seen in detective TV series. Jake left early in the morning, and I discreetly followed him. Knowing where he worked made this task easier, and I felt a thrill from my covert operation, finding it more engaging than staying idle at home. I spent the day lingering in nearby cafes and restaurants, keeping a watchful eye on his office. Jake's activities that day were unremarkable, and he returned to his office in the evening. I continued my surveillance from a cafe with a view of his company. At around 7:00 p.m., Jake left the office. Was he leaving work early today? If he went straight home, he would discover my own absence, so I needed to return quickly. I arrived home before Jake, prepared dinner, and waited for his return. However, he didn't come back until late at night. Something felt off. Determined to uncover the truth, I resolved to monitor Jake's actions again the next day. His routine was almost identical to the previous day. He went to work, left the office for a while, and then returned in the late afternoon. But what happened after that remained unclear. While observing from a different restaurant that evening, around 6:00 p.m., Jake left his office once again. Unlike the previous day, I didn't rush home immediately. I decided to follow Jake discreetly. Instead of heading towards the nearest train station, he walked in the opposite direction. I hesitated but decided to continue following him. He made his way to a lively area filled with hotels. Despite my resolve, I briefly lost sight of him while scanning the surroundings. Suddenly, Jake appeared right in front of me. We both froze, staring at each other in surprise. Jake was the first to speak. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" I was at a loss for words. "What are you doing here, Jake? What have you been up to all day?" I was taken aback. I was supposed to be the one investigating him, but now I was the one being questioned. "Go home now," he said. "We'll talk about this later." Being scolded by Jake on the spot was humiliating. I hurried back home. When Jake returned late at night, he bombarded me with startling words. "I don't know what you're doing at home, but following me around. Why should I support someone like that?" I tried to defend myself. "I've been handling the household chores. Do you think you've done your part just by doing a bit of cleaning?" "From now on," Jake said, "you'll have to manage with just $100 for living expenses." I was speechless. How was I supposed to live on just $100? The gas and electricity bills come from my account, and he hadn't contributed a cent to my food. Jake just smirked. "Then let me look for a job. I want to work part-time." Jake's lips twisted coldly. "Part-time isn't good enough. Find a full-time job and don't neglect the household chores." No matter how much I protested, Jake's determination was unwavering. As a result, I ended up returning to my previous job at the electronics company. My days became a blur of managing both work and household tasks. I had no time for anything else, not even for my brief detective pursuits. Jake became unusually strict with me, criticizing every little mistake. During the short moments we saw each other in the morning, he would complain about fingerprints on the windows, dirt on the stairway, and wrinkles in his shirts. He always found something to criticize before leaving for work. Since I was also working all day, I could only address his complaints at night. The days passed quickly as I juggled my responsibilities, and before I knew it, the end of the year and the Christmas family gathering approached. Jake was adamant that I should not attend. "You should stay home. There's no need for you to come to the gathering," he said. Feeling that arguing was futile, I remained silent. Just before he left, Jake delivered a final harsh remark. "Someone like you is too disgraceful to introduce to relatives." I was stunned by Jake's biting remarks, unable to understand how he could speak so harshly when I was working tirelessly and managing everything at home. Determined to confront the truth, I decided to attend the Christmas gathering unannounced, feeling it was important for his family to witness his true nature. I tightly gripped the thick envelope that had just arrived as I approached his family's house. Taking a deep breath, I opened the front door and stepped inside. Jake, upon seeing me, looked surprised but quickly masked his reaction, glaring at me while keeping his silence due to the presence of other guests. The relatives' gazes were icy and I could hear their whispered criticisms. I knew they had been deceived by Jake's version of events, but I remained unfazed. Despite their cold stares, I went to the kitchen to help with the food and drinks. As the evening wore on, and Jake drank more, his restraint seemed to loosen, and he began to voice his criticisms more openly. "Sarah is useless," he declared. "Even when she's in the kitchen, she doesn't cook properly at home." The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to me, their cold stares now focusing on my direction. Encouraged by the reaction, Jake's criticism grew louder. "The meals she makes are terrible," he announced. My father-in-law's sharp gaze zeroed in on me. "What does this mean?" he demanded sternly. "Isn't this highly inappropriate for Jake's wife?" Feeling the weight of the moment and the collective attention of the relatives, I decided it was time to stand my ground. I stepped forward and confronted Jake directly. "Have you ever actually eaten the food I've made? Aren't all your meals at your lover's place?" I challenged. My father-in-law's mouth dropped open in shock, and the room was filled with stunned silence. Only Jake seemed to panic, trying to salvage the situation. "Sarah, why are you making up such lies just because you're being criticized?" he stammered. Jake tried to defend himself to his father. "Dad, I don't have a mistress," he insisted, hoping his father would take his word over mine. But my father-in-law seemed torn, wanting to believe Jake. "Are you out of your mind, making up stories like this all of a sudden?" Jake said, dismissing my claims. But the accusation of Jake having a mistress wasn't just a passing joke. It was a serious matter. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope, handing the documents inside to my father-in-law. Jake, continuing his barrage of insults, demanded, "Apologize right now. If you do, I might overlook the fact that you lied." The relatives, seemingly convinced that Jake was innocent, maintained their cold stares toward me. As my father-in-law and mother-in-law carefully examined the documents, I braced myself. The papers were a detailed report from a private investigator I had hired after my own amateur sleuthing revealed troubling patterns in Jake's behavior. The investigation confirmed my fears. Jake was indeed having an affair. While I struggled to manage on $100 a month, balancing a full-time job and household duties, Jake was living comfortably with his mistress, spending most of his time at her place and even dining there daily. I had stumbled upon Jake in a bustling district lined with hotels, just as he was about to meet his mistress. With a firm voice, I declared, "This is no joke. Here's the evidence." I pointed to the documents in the hands of my in-laws. Murmurs of disbelief swept through the relatives. "Jake, is this true? Explain yourself," they demanded. The father-in-law and mother-in-law scrutinized the report, flipping through the pages. Jake, sweat forming on his brow, vehemently denied the accusations. "No, that can't be. I don't have a mistress," he protested. The documents contained numerous photos, including shots of Jake entering an apartment that wasn't ours, holding hands with an unknown woman. Other images showed him selecting jewelry with her, enjoying wine at a trendy restaurant, and shopping for groceries. In every photo, Jake's carefree smile was evident. I confronted him directly. "You always talked about how hard you were working. Is this how you spent your time?" Jake's face drained of color as he struggled to find words, clearly caught off guard by the overwhelming evidence. I continued, my voice rising with anger. "Why did you lie about not wanting to see the relatives or about the food tasting bad? Why distort the truth until the very end?" Jake persisted in trying to twist the facts, and I was deeply disappointed by his reaction. The room fell silent during our heated exchange. Then, my mother-in-law's sharp voice cut through the tension. "Jake, what on earth are you thinking?" Her voice, usually calm and composed, was now harsh and fierce. Even Jake seemed taken aback by her authoritative tone. She turned to me, her expression intense. "Are you trying to claim that all this evidence is false? Explain yourself properly." Her sudden shift from calm to furious was both frightening and compelling. The relatives stood silent, clearly intimidated by her presence. Jake, kneeling, began to speak in a subdued voice. "I've been involved with this woman since before our marriage. We met in a shop in New York." Murmurs of disbelief spread among the relatives as both my father-in-law and mother-in-law glared at Jake, their expressions stern. Jake's eyes were wet with tears and droplets fell to the floor. "I thought I could just marry someone suitable and live separately." "That suitable person you're referring to is me," I interjected. Jake bowed deeply. "I'm sorry. I thought you weren't interested in marriage, so as long as I provided money, it would be fine. I was wrong. I want to marry her. A life without love or affection with you wasn't what I wanted. I needed a way out." I was stunned by his admission. "Do you realize how incredibly selfish you're being right now?" Jake's voice trembled. "I'm truly sorry. I thought I'd only be considered an adult if I got married, and I thought once married, I wouldn't face nagging." He had assumed that while his parents were strict about marriage, they wouldn't interfere with a subsequent remarriage. He wanted to divorce first, so he could be open about his affair, and then remarry without issue, shifting the blame onto me while portraying himself as the victim. Jake's decision to set the monthly allowance to $100 was clearly meant to hinder my investigation into his affair. With so little money, I would have had no means to dig further, and taking a full-time job would only reduce my time for probing. However, Jake hadn't anticipated that I might hire a private detective. His short-sighted actions led to this moment of public humiliation. Infidelity was always condemned in our family, and Jake's betrayal of me after all my efforts was unforgivable. My mother-in-law's anger was palpable. Her temples bulged with rage as she confronted him. Jake, sobbing and sniffling, pressed his face to the floor, his tears and runny nose mixing in a pitiable display. "You are a disgrace to this family," my mother-in-law declared. "From now on, you are to sever all ties with us." The shock among the relatives was evident. It was clear that her word was final, and the father-in-law nodded in quiet agreement. There was no longer a place for Jake in the family. His infidelity and lies had led to his disarmament. Jake stumbled to his feet and left the room in tears. After he departed, my mother-in-law approached me, taking my hand with a firm grip and bowing her head. "Sarah, I am so sorry for Jake's unforgivable behavior. Please divorce him," she pleaded. The father-in-law also expressed his regret. "We fully trusted Jake and never imagined he could do such a thing. I deeply apologize for accusing you unjustly and shouting at you," he said. Though usually reticent and stern, he was remarkable in his ability to admit mistakes and apologize. The mother-in-law, holding back tears, continued to support me, revealing her strength as the backbone of the family. Jake's behavior was a stark contrast to the values instilled by such wonderful parents. Eventually, I reconciled with my in-laws, and the divorce proceedings with Jake were swiftly finalized. As Jake had hoped, once disowned by the family, he lost his prestigious family backing. His career was affected. He was removed from any path to promotion and now worked as an ordinary employee with significantly reduced income. His mistress also left him abruptly, ending their relationship. I received a fair division of assets from Jake, along with a generous amount from his family, and with the unexpected money, I enjoy occasional trips abroad. I continue to live comfortably in the marital flat, which I was allowed to use freely. Jake's presence is barely felt, and I lead a relaxed life. Despite the scandal, I've managed to return to work and now have a stable income, securing my future. I still occasionally communicate with my in-laws and am even invited to family gatherings at Christmas, though I politely decline. After my father suddenly passed away from an unexpected illness, leaving behind a staggering $2 million debt, my mother and brother Tom took matters into their own hands. They decided how to handle my father's inheritance without consulting me, leaving me to bear the brunt of the debt. My frustration with them reached a boiling point, but the thought of their future struggles made me smirk inwardly. I'm Nancy, a 24-year-old single woman working as a nursery teacher at a daycare. I graduated from a junior college and have always lived at home with my father, mother, and my brother Tom, who is close to my age. Since childhood, Tom and I haven't gotten along. A graduate of a prestigious university, Tom looked down on me for my junior college education. His arrogance was matched by his frequent mockery of my modest personality and average looks. "With your plain appearance and lack of impressive credentials, who would ever want to date you?" he would sneer. In reality, I do have a boyfriend, but I keep this a secret to avoid provoking Tom's scorn. Though Tom's sarcasm used to sting, those days are long behind me. I now take great pride in my work as a nursery teacher, finding immense joy in interacting with children and watching them grow. Tom's words no longer faze me. My mother, who reveres Tom for his prestigious university degree, constantly boasts about him to relatives and neighbors. In stark contrast, I was often treated as an afterthought. It was clear that my mother favored Tom and showered him with preferential treatment. Unlike her, my father always had my back. Whenever my mother gave snacks exclusively to Tom, my father would secretly share the same treats with me. He would proudly express his admiration for my choice to become a nursery teacher, and I deeply cherished his supportive gestures and words. My father was the CEO of a small company where Tom also worked. Unfortunately, the company's financial situation had been deteriorating recently. Despite my father's relentless efforts to cut the deficit and his late nights at the office, Tom remained indifferent. "I can't work for a company run by someone who looks so evenly poor," Tom said, resigning from the company to take a position elsewhere. Since her marriage, my mother had stopped working and fully dedicated herself to managing the household. With no experience in supporting my father's business, she didn't grasp the challenges he faced. Despite witnessing his daily struggles, she criticized him for the company's lack of success. "The company is still struggling. If you don't resolve the deficit soon, I won't be able to buy that new bag from the magazine. Honestly, what are you doing every day? You're completely useless," my mother said. She had an insatiable appetite for spending, especially on luxury items, often making impulsive purchases. Her dismissive attitude toward my father as if she couldn't see the value of his hard work, filled me with outrage. Though I'm no business expert, I've witnessed my father's tireless efforts from a young age and understand how challenging it is to manage a business. My mother, who has been with him for years, should recognize this as well. I couldn't fathom why she would blame him as though he were incompetent. One day, my frustration boiled over, and I confronted my mother, demanding she stop belittling my father. Her response was dismissive and condescending. "Why should I be scolded by someone like you? People without an education should keep their opinions to themselves. Don't speak on things you don't understand," she retorted. Tom, seemingly influenced by my mother's attitude, joined in and criticized me harshly. It was clear that despite sharing the same blood, our values and personalities were worlds apart. "Nancy, don't let their words affect you. Education doesn't define your worth. Take pride in your role as a nursery teacher. That's what truly matters," my father said. His words of encouragement warmed my heart and bolstered my resolve. Even though part of me wanted to stand up to Tom and felt overshadowed by him, my father's support made me feel fearless. As long as he was by my side, I knew I could face anything. An unexpected event shattered my world. "Father," I was horrified to learn that my father had collapsed at work. The company staff who reached out to me said he was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Without hesitation, I dashed to the hospital, only to find that my mother and brother were nowhere to be seen. "I'm too busy to leave. You'll have to handle Dad's care," my mother said. I was stunned by her response. How could she claim to be too busy when my father's life was at stake? As a jobless person, surely she had more flexibility than I did. What could possibly be more important than being there for my father? In disbelief, I took care of the hospital formalities and listened to the doctor's grim news. My father had acute heart failure and only had a few days left. I visited him as often as I could, hoping to see his smile once more. A few days after his collapse, as if sensing my presence, he briefly regained consciousness while I held his hand. "Dad, I'm so relieved to see you. Do you recognize me? Can you hear my voice?" I pleaded desperately, but he looked at me with a distant, vacant stare before quietly closing his eyes, never to open them again. Until my father passed away, neither my mother nor Tom made any effort to visit him. They only appeared just before the funeral, clearly reluctant to oversee the arrangements. During our conversation there, it became apparent that my father's company had gone bankrupt, leaving behind a $2 million debt. "Inheritances come with debts," my mother said, her tone dripping with disdain. As the funeral proceeded, both she and Tom began to blame my father for the situation. He was unreliable in life, and now he's left us with this burden. "What a curse," they complained. "What are we supposed to do about all this debt?" my mother wondered aloud. "I have a suggestion," Tom said with a smirk, turning his gaze toward me. "Since Dad had such a soft spot for you, why don't you inherit everything? You can also take on the debt. It's only fair to repay the love you received from him," my mother added, her voice carrying a sense of cold expectation. Unbelievably, my mother and Tom were trying to offload both my father's inheritance and his debts onto me. Despite my father's passing, they were more concerned with their own interests than with mourning his loss. They had always belittled and ridiculed both my father and me, seeing us merely as tools for their gain. However, I had a plan in reserve, something my father had asked me to use if anything happened to him. It was time to put it into action. I decided to keep my true intentions hidden and reluctantly agreed to their demands, all while secretly preparing to execute my plan. "Understood. I will take on the entire estate, including the debt." My easy acquiescence surprised both my mother and Tom, considering I was assuming a $2 million debt. They probably anticipated more resistance from me, but their satisfaction in offloading the burden onto me seemed to eclipse any surprise. They looked at me with a mix of triumph and condescension. "So, you're actually going to pay off all the debt. We appreciate that. It's lucky for us, even if I don't quite understand your thinking. You really are quite naive, though. I suppose that's to be expected given your limited education," Tom said. My mother and Tom ultimately relinquished their claims to my father's estate. With no other relatives to contest the inheritance, I was the sole beneficiary. After my father's death, I moved out of the home I no longer wished to live in and began a new chapter on my own. It was then that I discreetly set my plan into motion. Several months after my father's passing, one day, "What on earth is this?" Tom, who I hadn't seen in a while, appeared visibly enraged, his face reddening as if he was on the verge of lashing out. His fury was likely triggered by seeing me emerge from a mansion that could only be described as extravagant. Why is Nancy, who supposedly inherited $2 million in debt and has such a low social status, living in a house like this? It was clear that this was the question Tom and my mother would be asking. Seeing your astonished faces is quite the reunion after so long. I'm glad to see you're doing well, I responded. Who do you think you are? Making jokes with no education. I want to know what's going on, Tom snapped. This is where I live. Is it really so surprising to see me coming out of my own home? Tom, growing increasingly agitated, advanced toward me. However, as a nursery teacher accustomed to lifting children daily, I had developed more strength than the average woman. Tom, who led a sedentary lifestyle and avoided exercise, was comparatively weak. I swiftly overpowered him and had him on the ground in no time. He looked utterly bewildered. As Tom lay on the ground and my mother rushed to his side, I smiled and began to explain. The reason I'm living here is because of the decision you both made to relinquish Dad's inheritance. Before he passed away, my father had been quietly building wealth through real estate to secure our future. Despite the company's debt, the market value of the properties increased significantly after I inherited the estate. I sold them at the right time, and even after accounting for inheritance taxes, the profit from the real estate exceeded $5 million. My father had anticipated this rise in value, which is why I took on the inheritance, despite the debt. Instead of using the proceeds to pay off the $2 million debt immediately, I first ensured that the employees of my father's company were fairly compensated. Additionally, I received a life insurance payout of $3 million. The amount was truly staggering. Wait a minute, life insurance is usually paid out to the spouse, right? My mother interjected. It appears Dad changed the beneficiary to me, I explained. He had informed me of this while he was still alive. My father was deeply troubled by your harsh words and excessive spending. To ensure that his life insurance money was used wisely, he trusted me to manage it and change the beneficiary. I have a dream that I've kept to myself, one to support and nurture children facing economic hardships. With the funds from my father's estate and the life insurance payout, I built a large house that could easily be called a mansion. While continuing my work as a nursery teacher, I am also applying the real estate investment skills I learned from my father to steadily grow my assets. After explaining everything, my mother and Tom were enraged, their voices rising in anger. This is absurd. Why didn't you tell us something so crucial? If we had known about the real estate, we never would have let you inherit it. I responded firmly. Dad anticipated that you would react exactly like this if he knew. That's why he kept it a secret, to prevent you from claiming everything. I didn't expect you to respond just as he predicted, but it seems he was right. What are you talking about? Regardless, we deserve our share of the inheritance. We have a right to it. I was taken aback by my mother's audacious demand for a portion of the assets. It was clear that when it came to money, people reveal their true nature. My mother and Tom were showing their cowardice and arrogance, just as I had always known them to be. You both forfeited that right when you renounced the inheritance. It's not possible to reclaim it now. I cannot hand over the hard-earned assets my father accumulated to people who are consumed by their own greed. The ignorant, uneducated one just won't stop whining. Quit your nagging and hand it over now, Tom shouted. Despite their continued baseless complaints, I had no choice but to call security to have them removed. They left quietly after being escorted out. In the following days, security footage showed them loitering near my house, trying to find a way to claim my father's inheritance. Their persistence was unsettling. Using the footage, I reported them to the police as suspicious individuals. After that, I no longer saw my mother or Tom around my home. After some time had passed, I learned about my mother and Tom's situation from a family friend who had been close to us for years. Tom had found a new job, but his self-centered attitude quickly earned him a poor reputation. Within less than a year, he had alienated his boss and was relegated to menial desk work, a far cry from the special treatment he had enjoyed as the president's son at my father's company. Eventually, the harsh work environment took its toll, and he left the job. His tarnished reputation made it challenging for him to find new employment within the industry. "Why aren't you working? Stop lazing around," my mother would admonish. "It's not like I'm just sitting around doing nothing," Tom would retort. "What kind of effort are you putting in, you useless, unemployed person?" my mother would criticize. After witnessing Tom's failure, her attitude toward him changed drastically. Once doting on him, she now blamed him for his incompetence and joblessness, growing increasingly cold and distant. The shift in my mother's behavior placed immense psychological pressure on Tom, eventually leading him to become a recluse. Having relied on my father's income for years and never having developed the skills or inclination to work, my mother now faces financial struggles alongside Tom. Both are struggling to make ends meet. As for me, I am happily married to the man I had been dating, and we now live in the large house I own. My husband shares my passion for helping children in economic need. Together, we are working towards this dream by setting up the necessary facilities and obtaining the required qualifications. I hold deep gratitude for my irreplaceable father, and with my husband by my side, I am living a fulfilling and purposeful life. After my father suddenly passed away from an unexpected illness, leaving behind a staggering $2 million debt, my mother and brother Tom took matters into their own hands. They decided how to handle my father's inheritance without consulting me, leaving me to bear the brunt of the debt. My frustration with them reached a boiling point, but the thought of their future struggles made me smirk inwardly. I'm Nancy, a 24-year-old single woman working as a nursery teacher at a daycare. I graduated from a junior college and have always lived at home with my father, mother, and my brother Tom, who is close to my age. Since childhood, Tom and I haven't gotten along. A graduate of a prestigious university, Tom looked down on me for my junior college education. His arrogance was matched by his frequent mockery of my modest personality and average looks. With your plain appearance and lack of impressive credentials, who would ever want to date you? He would sneer. In reality, I do have a boyfriend, but I keep this a secret to avoid provoking Tom's scorn. Though Tom's sarcasm used to sting, those days are long behind me. I now take great pride in my work as a nursery teacher, finding immense joy in interacting with children and watching them grow. Tom's words no longer faze me. My mother, who reveres Tom for his prestigious university degree, constantly boasts about him to relatives and neighbors. In stark contrast, I was often treated as an afterthought. It was clear that my mother favored Tom and showered him with preferential treatment. Unlike her, my father always had my back. Whenever my mother gave snacks exclusively to Tom, my father would secretly share the same treats with me. He would proudly express his admiration for my choice to become a nursery teacher, and I deeply cherished his supportive gestures and words. My father was the CEO of a small company where Tom also worked. Unfortunately, the company's financial situation had been deteriorating recently. Despite my father's relentless efforts to cut the deficit and his late nights at the office, Tom remained indifferent. I can't work for a company run by someone who looks so evenly poor, Tom said, resigning from the company to take a position elsewhere. Since her marriage, my mother had stopped working and fully dedicated herself to managing the household. With no experience in supporting my father's business, she didn't grasp the challenges he faced. Despite witnessing his daily struggles, she criticized him for the company's lack of success. The company is still struggling. If you don't resolve the deficit soon, I won't be able to buy that new bag from the magazine. Honestly, what are you doing every day? You're completely useless, my mother said. She had an insatiable appetite for spending, especially on luxury items, often making impulsive purchases. Her dismissive attitude toward my father, as if she couldn't see the value of his hard work, filled me with outrage. Though I'm no business expert, I've witnessed my father's tireless efforts from a young age and understand how challenging it is to manage a business. My mother, who has been with him for years, should recognize this as well. I couldn't fathom why she would blame him as though he were incompetent. One day, my frustration boiled over, and I confronted my mother, demanding she stop belittling my father. Her response was dismissive and condescending. Why should I be scolded by someone like you? People without an education should keep their opinions to themselves. Don't speak on things you don't understand, she retorted. Tom, seemingly influenced by my mother's attitude, joined in and criticized me harshly. It was clear that despite sharing the same blood, our values and personalities were worlds apart. Nancy, don't let their words affect you. Education doesn't define your worth. Take pride in your role as a nursery teacher. That's what truly matters, my father said. His words of encouragement warmed my heart and bolstered my resolve. Even though part of me wanted to stand up to Tom and felt overshadowed by him, my father's support made me feel fearless. As long as he was by my side, I knew I could face anything. An unexpected event shattered my world. Father, I was horrified to learn that my father had collapsed at work. The company staff who reached out to me said he was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Without hesitation, I dashed to the hospital, only to find that my mother and brother were nowhere to be seen. I'm too busy to leave. You'll have to handle Dad's care, my mother said. I was stunned by her response. How could she claim to be too busy when my father's life was at stake? As a jobless person, surely she had more flexibility than I did. What could possibly be more important than being there for my father? In disbelief, I took care of the hospital formalities and listened to the doctor's grim news. My father had acute heart failure and only had a few days left. I visited him as often as I could, hoping to see his smile once more. A few days after his collapse, as if sensing my presence, he briefly regained consciousness while I held his hand. Dad, I'm so relieved to see you. Do you recognize me? Can you hear my voice? I pleaded desperately, but he looked at me with a distant, vacant stare before quietly closing his eyes, never to open them again. Until my father passed away, neither my mother nor Tom made any effort to visit him. They only appeared just before the funeral, clearly reluctant to oversee the arrangements. During our conversation there, it became apparent that my father's company had gone bankrupt, leaving behind a $2 million debt. Inheritances come with debts, my mother said, her tone dripping with disdain. As the funeral proceeded, both she and Tom began to blame my father for the situation. He was unreliable in life, and now he's left us with this burden. What a curse, they complained. What are we supposed to do about all this debt? My mother wondered aloud. I have a suggestion, Tom said with a smirk, turning his gaze toward me. Since Dad had such a soft spot for you, why don't you inherit everything? You can also take on the debt. It's only fair to repay the love you received from him. My mother added, her voice carrying a sense of cold expectation. Unbelievably, my mother and Tom were trying to offload both my father's inheritance and his debts onto me. Despite my father's passing, they were more concerned with their own interests than with mourning his loss. They had always belittled and ridiculed both my father and me, seeing us merely as tools for their gain. However, I had a plan in reserve, something my father had asked me to use if anything happened to him. It was time to put it into action. I decided to keep my true intentions hidden and reluctantly agreed to their demands, all while secretly preparing to execute my plan. Understood. I will take on the entire estate, including the debt. My easy acquiescence surprised both my mother and Tom, considering I was assuming a $2 million debt. They probably anticipated more resistance from me, but their satisfaction in offloading the burden onto me seemed to eclipse any surprise. They looked at me with a mix of triumph and condescension. So, you're actually going to pay off all the debt. We appreciate that. It's lucky for us, even if I don't quite understand your thinking. You really are quite naive, though. I suppose that's to be expected given your limited education, Tom said. My mother and Tom ultimately relinquished their claims to my father's estate. With no other relatives to contest the inheritance, I was the sole beneficiary. After my father's death, I moved out of the home I no longer wished to live in and began a new chapter on my own. It was then that I discreetly set my plan into motion. Several months after my father's passing, one day, "What on earth is this?" Tom, who I hadn't seen in a while, appeared visibly enraged, his face reddening as if he was on the verge of lashing out. His fury was likely triggered by seeing me emerge from a mansion that could only be described as extravagant. Why is Nancy, who supposedly inherited $2 million in debt and has such a low social status, living in a house like this? It was clear that this was the question Tom and my mother would be asking. Seeing your astonished faces is quite the reunion after so long. I'm glad to see you're doing well, I responded. Who do you think you are? Making jokes with no education. I want to know what's going on, Tom snapped. This is where I live. Is it really so surprising to see me coming out of my own home? Tom, growing increasingly agitated, advanced toward me. However, as a nursery teacher accustomed to lifting children daily, I had developed more strength than the average woman. Tom, who led a sedentary lifestyle and avoided exercise, was comparatively weak. I swiftly overpowered him and had him on the ground in no time. He looked utterly bewildered. As Tom lay on the ground and my mother rushed to his side, I smiled and began to explain. The reason I'm living here is because of the decision you both made to relinquish Dad's inheritance. Before he passed away, my father had been quietly building wealth through real estate to secure our future. Despite the company's debt, the market value of the properties increased significantly after I inherited the estate. I sold them at the right time, and even after accounting for inheritance taxes, the profit from the real estate exceeded $5 million. My father had anticipated this rise in value, which is why I took on the inheritance, despite the debt. Instead of using the proceeds to pay off the $2 million debt immediately, I first ensured that the employees of my father's company were fairly compensated. Additionally, I received a life insurance payout of $3 million. The amount was truly staggering. Wait a minute, life insurance is usually paid out to the spouse, right? My mother interjected. It appears Dad changed the beneficiary to me, I explained. He had informed me of this while he was still alive. My father was deeply troubled by your harsh words and excessive spending. To ensure that his life insurance money was used wisely, he trusted me to manage it and change the beneficiary. I have a dream that I've kept to myself, one to support and nurture children facing economic hardships. With the funds from my father's estate and the life insurance payout, I built a large house that could easily be called a mansion. While continuing my work as a nursery teacher, I am also applying the real estate investment skills I learned from my father to steadily grow my assets. After explaining everything, my mother and Tom were enraged, their voices rising in anger. This is absurd. Why didn't you tell us something so crucial? If we had known about the real estate, we never would have let you inherit it. I responded firmly. Dad anticipated that you would react exactly like this if he knew. That's why he kept it a secret, to prevent you from claiming everything. I didn't expect you to respond just as he predicted, but it seems he was right. What are you talking about? Regardless, we deserve our share of the inheritance. We have a right to it. I was taken aback by my mother's audacious demand for a portion of the assets. It was clear that when it came to money, people reveal their true nature. My mother and Tom were showing their cowardice and arrogance, just as I had always known them to be. You both forfeited that right when you renounced the inheritance. It's not possible to reclaim it now. I cannot hand over the hard-earned assets my father accumulated to people who are consumed by their own greed. The ignorant, uneducated one just won't stop whining. Quit your nagging and hand it over now, Tom shouted. Despite their continued baseless complaints, I had no choice but to call security to have them removed. They left quietly after being escorted out. In the following days, security footage showed them loitering near my house, trying to find a way to claim my father's inheritance. Their persistence was unsettling. Using the footage, I reported them to the police as suspicious individuals. After that, I no longer saw my mother or Tom around my home. After some time had passed, I learned about my mother and Tom's situation from a family friend who had been close to us for years. Tom had found a new job, but his self-centered attitude quickly earned him a poor reputation. Within less than a year, he had alienated his boss and was relegated to menial desk work, a far cry from the special treatment he had enjoyed as the president's son at my father's company. Eventually, the harsh work environment took its toll, and he left the job. His tarnished reputation made it challenging for him to find new employment within the industry. "Why aren't you working? Stop lazing around," my mother would admonish. "It's not like I'm just sitting around doing nothing," Tom would retort. "What kind of effort are you putting in, you useless, unemployed person?" my mother would criticize. After witnessing Tom's failure, her attitude toward him changed drastically. Once doting on him, she now blamed him for his incompetence and joblessness, growing increasingly cold and distant. The shift in my mother's behavior placed immense psychological pressure on Tom, eventually leading him to become a recluse. Having relied on my father's income for years and never having developed the skills or inclination to work, my mother now faces financial struggles alongside Tom. Both are struggling to make ends meet. As for me, I am happily married to the man I have been dating, and we now live in the large house I own. My husband shares my passion for helping children in economic need. Together, we are working towards this dream by setting up the necessary facilities and obtaining the required qualifications. I hold deep gratitude for my irreplaceable father, and with my husband by my side, I am living a fulfilling and purposeful life. At a barbecue party hosted by Scene's workplace, I faced an unsettling situation. Scene, my husband, took every opportunity to make disparaging remarks about me. He openly criticized my lack of involvement in housework, comparing me to a parasite and expressing disdain for other men's wives. As I listened to his hurtful comments, I could feel the cold, judgmental stares of his colleagues piercing through me. Their looks stung deeply, leaving me in considerable pain. But today, I am no longer the person who stays silent. With a newfound determination, I decided to reveal the truth about Scene. The murmurs of his colleagues and the astonished expressions of his female coworkers were palpable, but it was the company president's reaction that truly shocked everyone. My name is Helen, and I'm 32 years old. I work at a variety store and have been with the company since graduation. I had always envisioned a long career there, but the stress from interpersonal conflicts eventually became too much. After 3 years, I resigned before I reached a breaking point. I took various jobs in supermarkets and bookstores, but eventually, I found my place at the variety store. This job was a dream come true for me, given my love for collecting knickknacks. It offered the best work environment I had ever experienced, and I began to enjoy my days at work. Despite the positive changes in my professional and personal life, I faced a challenge. I was still single. As friends around me married and formed relationships, I felt the pressure to seriously consider marriage myself. However, with no men at my workplace and limited opportunities to meet new people due to my indoor hobbies, I felt stuck. I envied the couples I saw and longed to meet someone special. One day, while working at the store, a friend stopped by as a customer. With the store quiet, we started chatting and eventually discussed romance. I confessed my lack of romantic prospects, and my friend, though not interested in marriage herself, offered to set up a mixer for me. At this mixer, I met Scene, a handsome and successful man from a top company. We began dating, and after a while, he proposed. His stability, kindness, and the way he prioritized me made me feel that this was true happiness. The joy of his proposal was beyond words. As a housewife, I devoted myself to managing our home, ensuring Scene could unwind and relax when he was home. I took great care to cook Scene's favorite dishes and keep our home spotless. "Hey, this is my favorite. Did you make it?" he'd ask with a smile that brightened my day. "Yes, eat as much as you like," I'd reply, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction from his happiness. Scene would spend his holidays with me, actively helping around the house, and I felt incredibly blessed. The worries about never finding a partner seemed like a distant memory. However, a few months into our marriage, things began to change. The initial happiness faded and Scene grew distant and cold. His once warm demeanor turned into an unsettling indifference, leaving me unsure of how to handle it. "Scene, what time will you be home today?" I'd ask, only to be met with vague responses. "I don't know," he'd say, a stark contrast to his previous informative replies. Even when I inquired about his dinner preferences, he would brush it off with, "I don't need dinner tonight." I wondered if he was simply tired or overwhelmed with work. I understood the demands of a busy schedule, having experienced them myself, but Scene's job at a renowned corporation seemed beyond my comprehension. I'd send him off each morning with a cheerful "take care," but it began to feel like an irritation to him. He started showing disinterest in my cooking and would sometimes refuse the lunch I prepared. Sighing, I'd pore over my recipe books, trying to find inspiration to make meals that would please him. Yet each glance at those books only deepened my loneliness. I agonized over when we might share joyful moments again, but Scene's attitude remained unchanged and continued to worsen. For example, if he saw a slight disorder in the shoes in the closet, he'd criticize, "Can't you even line up the shoes properly?" And if he happened to eat a meal I had prepared after a long time, he'd mock, "I can't believe you'd serve something like this." He even went as far as saying, "I'd rather eat a ready meal than your cooking." The shock and disappointment I felt were profound. He used to praise my cooking and ask for seconds, but now it seemed like everything I did was wrong. The more I struggled, the more I questioned Scene's past behavior. Then, unexpectedly, Scene spoke to me, "Hey, we're having dinner with my parents in a week at a fancy restaurant. Please dress appropriately." This simple conversation made my heart leap with a mix of hope and anxiety. I was excited to meet my in-laws for the first time since Scene and I got married. We hadn't had a formal wedding, so this dinner felt like a significant occasion. Both my father-in-law and mother-in-law had always seemed warm and welcoming, similar to how Scene was in the past. To prepare, I paid extra attention to my skincare and hair and bought a special outfit for the restaurant. I was eager to reunite with them. However, when I finally met them, Their demeanor was strikingly different from what I had expected. They openly expressed their dissatisfaction with me. I struggled to understand why, until my mother-in-law's words made things clear. "Helen, I've heard that you're always slacking off on household duties and lazing around at home. Is that true? It's fine to be a full-time housewife, but neglecting cooking and cleaning isn't acceptable." "I didn't expect this from you," she said. My father-in-law echoed her sentiments, adding, "There must be some misunderstanding here. Or rather, it seems Scene has been giving us incorrect information." I tried to defend myself. "That's not true at all." But Scene interrupted with a scolding tone. "Come on, lying isn't good. You're just lazing around, aren't you?" I was shocked by their perception of me. My mother-in-law continued, "I was a full-time housewife too, but I worked hard every day to keep the house in order for my working husband. Don't you have any gratitude towards Scene?" Before I could respond, Scene cut me off again, insisting that only he could speak to my in-laws about me. It became clear that he had deliberately conveyed misleading information. The betrayal hurt deeply. My attempts to explain were futile, and to someone who doesn't know me well, I might appear as a woman who married for financial security. The thought of being judged this way was chilling. After the dinner, I was left feeling disheartened and misunderstood. I confronted Scene about the lies he told his parents. "Why did you lie? I've been working hard and cleaning every day. What are you dissatisfied with?" I asked, my frustration mounting. Scene didn't answer, only telling me to be quiet. The silence that followed was heavy and disheartening. I was at a loss for how to address the misunderstanding with my in-laws and was desperate to understand why Scene's attitude had shifted so dramatically. I wished he would clearly communicate if my behavior was a problem. If not, some explanation was necessary. I felt overwhelmed with anxiety as Scene continued to avoid meaningful conversation. His behavior toward me deteriorated further. He criticized the food I cooked, made a fuss over a single strand of hair as if I never cleaned, and scolded me for simply relaxing on the sofa. Scene's return home became increasingly erratic, often coming back at midnight or not at all. Despite this, I refrained from arguing with him. He was the only partner I had ever found, and though he was distant now, I hoped he might return to the person he once was. The fear of never marrying again and potentially spending my life alone was paralyzing. The thought of divorce was terrifying, and I didn't have the courage to leave him. Around the time Scene started coming home at dawn, I noticed something troubling. A faint scent of unfamiliar women's perfume on his suit, along with traces of red lipstick. These clues made me suspect an affair. Although I had been wary of his frequent overnight stays and absences under the guise of work, the abrupt change in his behavior and these new signs only intensified my doubts. I was consumed by anger and confusion. The thought that he might be spending nights with someone else filled me with anguish. I didn't want to lose Scene, but if he was indeed cheating, that was a different matter entirely. I decided it was time to confront Scene about the truth. "Hey, I need to talk to you," I said as he was unusually home on the weekend. "It's really important." Despite my insistence, Scene remained engrossed in the TV, ignoring me. "Are you listening?" I raised my voice. "What is it?" Scene finally responded, clearly annoyed by my anger. "Are you cheating on me?" I asked directly. What are you talking about?" he replied, feigning confusion. "There's lipstick on your jacket, and I can smell women's perfume and fabric softener that's not from our house. All those times you said you were working late were lies," I pressed. Scene responded with a dismissive attitude. "Lipstick? I don't know what you're talking about." I continued to press him. "You're having an affair, aren't you? Tell me the truth." Scene's response was cold and indifferent. "What does it matter to you if I had an affair?" he said, as if it was of no consequence. No matter how seriously I questioned him, he just sneered and shrugged it off. "Hey, answer me seriously. I've had enough," I demanded, but my frustration didn't seem to reach him. "You're annoying and too persistent. I have my circumstances and you live off my money, so just listen to what I say," he retorted, then left the house. The exchange made it clear that Scene's heart was no longer in our relationship. Once I realized that, my feelings for him rapidly cooled. Why had I clung to him for so long? Continuing the marriage with someone so indifferent would only wear me down emotionally. Stirred by my newfound clarity, I decided to take action. 2 months later, I attended a barbecue organized by Scene's workplace. His company had invited employees and their families, and Scene, having heard that other employees were bringing their families, reluctantly invited me. His parents were there, and by the time I arrived, they were already preparing the meat. Scene. I've been waiting, I greeted. Oh, you came. Helen was the one who wanted to come and kept insisting, Scene replied, causing his parents to glare at me. As the barbecue started, many people, regardless of rank, gathered around Scene. At home, he acted so differently, but in public he behaved as if we were close friends. I was furious to hear Scene speaking ill of me at the barbecue, which was supposed to be a fun event. She's really useless, he said, making disparaging remarks about me. I was certain he was doing the same at work. None of the other employees stopped him, and they all looked at me coldly. The crowd continued to gather around Scene, and it seemed the company president was among them. Scene, this is your wife, the one people have been talking about, the president remarked, with me standing right there. You have it tough, don't you? Scene didn't just accept the president's criticism, he added false claims of his own. Normally, I might have stayed silent, but today was different. Excuse me, our house is always clean, I interjected. Maybe you don't see it because you're off on sales visits, spending time at the president's daughter's house. The reaction was immediate. The employees and Scene's parents began murmuring. The president looked surprised, his eyes wide with disbelief. What are you talking about? Scene stammered, clearly flustered. Without hesitation, I spread out photos and documents on a nearby table. Scene's panic was evident as he saw the decisive evidence of his infidelity. About 2 months before this confrontation, I had hired a detective agency to gather proof of his affair. I was determined to expose him, and feeling overwhelmed by what I could do alone, I enlisted professional help. The detective provided various pieces of evidence, photos of Scene walking arm in arm with a woman I didn't recognize, entering a vacation hotel with her, and going into a love nest that appeared to be her home. This woman turned out to be the president's daughter, the daughter of the president of the company Scene worked for. It was unclear how they met, but Scene frequently visited her house, suggesting a close relationship that seemed to predate our current issues. The detective noted that while further investigation was possible, his behavioral patterns were consistent, making it unlikely we find more significant evidence. Seeing these photos was a shock that dwarfed even the discovery of lipstick on Scene's suit. My anger and disappointment grew, knowing that Scene's deceit was far more extensive than I had initially feared. Hearing Scene's dismissive response, I decided to end the investigation. The next step was clear. Divorce. I couldn't continue living under the same roof as him. My heart was filled with nothing but anger. By then, I had already heard from Scene about the barbecue event. Given his behavior, I was certain he was spreading false rumors about me at work. I resolved to use the barbecue as an opportunity to reveal his deceit. I wasn't entirely sure if my plan would work, and I didn't have solid proof of what Scene was saying about me at the company. But reality unfolded exactly as I had imagined. Hey Helen, what are these photos? And why is there a picture of me with the president's daughter? Scene's face turned pale as he saw the evidence. Still trying to lie in this situation, I countered. The evidence is clear. I turned to the president. Sir, the woman in this photo is your daughter, correct? Can you confirm that? The president hesitated as he looked at the photo. In a low voice, he finally admitted, yes, that's my daughter. Scene, where did you meet my daughter? I demanded. The atmosphere, which had been friendly moments before, became tense. Scene, clearly flustered, tried to avoid the question. The president's pressure was evident, and eventually, Scene began to explain. He said he had first met the president's daughter in the company parking lot. She had come to the company on an errand, and he happened to strike up a conversation with her. Despite knowing Scene was married, the president's daughter was flattered by his attention and continued their relationship. Hearing this, I resolved to demand compensation for the emotional distress I had endured, even though she was the president's daughter. Scene was left completely crestfallen. I apologize. The daughter has her share of the blame for not refusing his advances, the president said, his voice heavy with frustration. But this situation wouldn't have occurred if you hadn't approached her. We'll discuss this further when you come to work tomorrow. Just come to my office first. Scene turned to me, desperation in his eyes. Helen, could you please forgive me? This will affect my job. Forgive you? I shot back, incredulous. Think about everything you've done. You've lied about me to the company and your parents. You've painted me as sloppy and incompetent. How can you expect forgiveness after all that? My mother-in-law, who had been listening in shock, couldn't hold back. Helen, Is everything Scene has been saying true? We've heard that you're lazy and do nothing but lounge around every day. Is that true? No, I said firmly. I've been cleaning and cooking every day. Scene has complained about everything. You might not have believed me before, but look around now. No one here is supporting Scene. The president and other employees, having witnessed the truth, began to apologize. I'm sorry, Helen, the president said. I should have taken your words seriously. My in-laws, bowing their heads in apology, followed suit. The apologies were heartfelt but temporary. I could have fully forgiven them on the spot. Their behavior had deeply insulted me, and it wasn't something I could easily overlook. My anger, however, was primarily directed at Scene. I've already consulted with a lawyer, I said resolutely. I'm filing for divorce. A divorce? Why? Why do you need more reasons? Scene pleaded, his face turning ashen. No one showed him any sympathy. The following day, Scene and I went to the lawyer's office. The president's daughter was there with the president, and all the involved parties gathered for a formal discussion. As everything was set up, the lawyer began the proceedings. Scene looked dismayed, while the president's daughter wore an expression of shock. What is this? She asked. These are photos from a detective agency I hired, I explained. I suspected Scene was cheating because of the perfume smell on his suit and the lipstick marks. How could I not suspect? The president listened and nodded in understanding. Helen is seeking a divorce, asset division from Scene, and compensation for mental distress. The president's daughter, stunned, replied sharply, compensation. I've done nothing wrong. The president's daughter, clearly flustered, struggled to defend herself. I didn't do anything wrong, she said, her voice lacking conviction. The president, visibly displeased, responded sharply, you knew he was married. How can you claim no fault when you willingly engaged with him? Her response seemed immature and evasive, and she appeared unable to acknowledge her own mistakes. As Scene muttered about the divorce and asset division, the president admonished him. If you were truly remorseful, you wouldn't be making excuses. You need to face the reality of your situation. Scene hung his head in silence, clearly avoiding responsibility. I addressed him firmly. This is my final request as your wife. I need a divorce. Scene struggled with the decision, and my frustration grew. I made it clear, if you keep dragging this out, we'll end up in court. The mention of court seemed to shock Scene, and he reluctantly agreed to the divorce. The president's daughter, realizing there was no way out, agreed to the settlement, although she sought financial assistance from her father. The president, however, was resolute. I can't just give you money. You must take responsibility for your actions. Following the divorce, I received a lump sum settlement from both Scene and the president's daughter. With this money, I moved into a new apartment and began a fresh chapter in my life. After the divorce, Scene's parents and the president offered formal apologies. I learned that Scene had been dismissed from his job, largely due to the president's outrage over the affair, though officially it was due to poor conduct. The president's daughter had severed ties with him, and it was clear she wanted nothing further to do with him. Scene's downfall was complete, losing his job, his lover, and his family. Reflecting on the situation, I felt a deep sense of relief that I had exposed the truth. If I had stayed in the marriage, Scene's behavior would have continued to deteriorate, and false rumors about me would have persisted. Now, living comfortably in my new apartment, I focus on my own happiness. I work at a local variety store surrounded by things I love and feel content with my life. Sometimes, I wonder if I should have pursued the divorce sooner, but I believe waiting for the right moment was the best decision. Moving forward, I'm committed to living a life unburdened by others' influence. My dinner still isn't ready. If you're not going to take care of the housework, we're getting a divorce. I wonder who he thinks makes it possible for him to have meals. Fine, if that's how you feel, maybe we should get a divorce. What? I've had enough of this marriage and want to leave this house. Can you help me? Why should I? We're no longer connected, right? I'm Karen, a 34-year-old office worker. It's been a year since I married Shane. While many enjoy the bliss of newlywed life, my experience has been far from that. Honestly, our relationship has been strained. The root of the issue lies in his behavior. I overlooked it before marriage, but now I see that he's a classic domineering husband, overly controlling. Hey, where's the food? When will it be ready? I just got home. If you came home earlier, you could have made something yourself. What are you talking about? Don't you see I've been working hard and just got home? I was at work too. Your job can't be that important. I probably make more than you do. Bragging about your earnings. You're really narrow-minded. I hold a significant position at my company. I'll be earning more than you soon enough. Well, I hope that's true. Are you doubting me? How dare you question me like that? My husband reacts defensively to every word I say, trying to exert control. I'm going to set a curfew for you. A curfew? I was taken aback by his sudden declaration. We're not children. I'm serious. Be home by 7:00 p.m. Don't say such ridiculous things. I might be working late because of overtime. No matter how much I protested, my husband remained unyielding. Be quiet. I'm serious. You need to follow this rule. A promise should be made with mutual agreement. What my husband was imposing was nothing but coercion, a blatant threat. A few days later, after coming home past 8:00 p.m. due to work, I was met with an unbelievable situation. What? What do you mean? As I tried to unlock the front door, I realized the chain was on. Panicking, I pressed the intercom. Yes? I heard my husband's voice through the intercom. What's going on here? What do you mean? We agreed on a curfew of 7:00 p.m., didn't we? Huh? You were serious about that? Of course I was serious. I told him that while he speaks with such confidence, his behavior is just childish. I really want him to stop. Stop the nonsense and just open the door. No way. You always get so full of yourself. Full of myself? What are you talking about? I'm saying you act so arrogant when you think you have the upper hand. In the end, my husband really refused to let me into the house. I was deeply unsettled by his drastic change, wondering how he could have become so different from the man I once knew. We had first met at a social mixer. At that time, he was a successful businessman working for a top company, and he was very intent on winning me over. With his career and finances stable, I was drawn to his advances. He was always polite and respectful, and that didn't change when we started dating. I believe he was a kind and wonderful man, and I was truly happy when he proposed. Karen, I vow to make you happy with these hands of mine. Trust me, and let's build a future together. Yes, thank you. I look forward to supporting each other. I had believed that marrying him would surely lead to happiness, but once we were married, it was far from what I had imagined. My husband turned out to be selfish, arrogant, and prone to verbal abuse. To make matters worse, about 6 months after our marriage, he abruptly quit his job. You quit your job? Why? That company wasn't worth it. They didn't appreciate my talents. Why should a junior be promoted over me? It's absurd. He left his job on a whim, frustrated by his lack of promotion. It was a shocking turn of events. I had respected him as a confident professional working at a prestigious company, and I had tolerated his verbal abuse as a result. But now, my once elite husband was suddenly unemployed. He went to numerous job interviews afterward, but none resulted in an offer. Damn it, why is this happening to me? I come from a top company. Even though I'm lowering myself by applying here, why can't I get the job? Maybe it's your attitude that's coming through in the interviews. Ha! Don't act like you know anything. Your workplace is a lower-ranking company anyway. That's harsh. So, you think so? I'm just speaking the truth. My husband took out his frustration on me. He had always been controlling at home, but his verbal abuse escalated significantly. Eventually, unable to find a new job, he settled for a part-time position working only 3 days a week, claiming it was due to job hunting. His income dropped to around $700 a month, yet he continued to act arrogantly toward me. My view of him deteriorated daily, and I regretted marrying him more and more. I found myself constantly overwhelmed with household chores and meal preparations while enduring his endless complaints. It felt like dealing with a teenager, and I was left physically and emotionally drained despite everything. I couldn't bring myself to consider divorce even though we had been married for less than a year. During this time, my husband grew increasingly bold, eventually setting a curfew for me and locking me out of the house. I wondered why I had to endure such treatment. After coming home exhausted from work and even doing the grocery shopping, he locked me out for missing the curfew. I was completely bewildered. Normally, I would consider returning to my parents' home, but since they had passed away, I didn't know where to turn. Desperate for help, I decided to call my best friend, Mika. Hello, Mika, can I come over now? What's going on? Did something happen? My husband won't let me into the house. What? Why not? Okay, come over right away. Thank you so much. With that, I hurried to Mika's place. Sorry for the sudden visit. Don't worry about it. What happened? I explained how my husband had locked me out of the house because I missed the curfew he had set. He actually did that. Yes, I can't believe it. It feels like he's being really abusive. Maybe his pride from working at a big corporation is making him look down on you. Oh, and I also mentioned my husband's sudden resignation. What? A part-time job? That's unbelievable. How can he act like this when you're the one supporting us? Yes, I'm thinking it might be best to leave him sooner rather than later. But we've only been married for less than a year. It doesn't feel right to just get divorced so easily. Karen, are you truly happy? No. My best friend looked concerned, pondering for a moment before offering a suggestion. I'm not sure if your marriage can be salvaged, but maybe you should start documenting his abusive behavior. You could keep a record or even make recordings. Really? I believe you should divorce him as soon as possible. And if you do decide to go through with it, I hope you can ensure he faces serious consequences. Yeah, you might be right. Exactly. It's important to document everything, and I'm here to support you through this. If you need a safe place, you can always come here. Thank you, Mika. My best friend was a tremendous source of comfort and support, and I was truly grateful. Having her as an ally gave me the courage I needed. To show my appreciation, I used the ingredients I had bought from the supermarket to prepare a homemade meal for her. This is delicious, Karen. You're really skilled at cooking. Really? It's been a while since someone praised my cooking, so I'm thrilled to hear that. Reuniting with my best friend after such a long time lifted my spirits. After leaving Mika's house, I sent an apology to my husband. Once he forgave me, I returned home. Have you really thought about what you did wrong? Yes, I realize I was wrong. I'm sorry. As I apologized with my head bowed, my husband's expression softened with satisfaction. As long as you understand, that's fine. Just be more careful next time. From then on, I did my best to meet my husband's demands. Despite my efforts, he often resorted to insults when he was in a bad mood. His words were belittling and dismissive, and each time they cut deep. I began recording these incidents, gathering evidence for when I reached my breaking point. My husband remained unemployed, only working part-time. It seemed he wasn't even trying to find a new job, as if he had given up. I was managing to support both of us with my income and handled all the household chores. He continued to complain and act badly towards me, trying to assert control. He seemed content with the situation, dependent on my salary, yet treating me with emotional abuse. I confided in my best friend that I didn't want a divorce, but my patience was wearing thin with his increasingly unacceptable behavior. I felt like I was at the end of my rope. How could he be so insensitive? How does he view me? Why did he even marry me? These questions plagued my mind. One day, after being forced to stay late at work, I arrived home past 7:00 p.m. Thankfully, my husband was out and hadn't returned yet, so I managed to get inside and began hastily preparing dinner. But he came home soon after. Oh, well, welcome back. Noticing that dinner wasn't ready, he looked displeased. Why isn't dinner ready yet? I'm sorry, it will be ready soon. Don't lie, it looks like you've just started. I apologize. I just got home. As we talked, I noticed he was carrying a bag from an expensive brand. While I was working hard, he had been leisurely spending on luxury goods. His selfishness was infuriating and inexcusable. Despite this, he continued to berate me, completely disregarding my feelings. Are you incapable of learning, or are you deliberately trying to provoke me? You incompetent fool. If you neglect the household, we'll get a divorce. Do you understand? In that moment, my patience snapped. Did he really think he was entitled to a meal provided by someone he treated so poorly? Fine, if that's how you feel, shall we get a divorce then? What? My husband looked stunned. I've decided to leave this house. Are you really serious about divorcing me? Yes, I can't continue with you. You're superficial, useless, arrogant, and the worst partner I've ever had. My words seemed to ignite fury in my husband. His face reddened, and his whole body trembled with rage. How dare you speak to me like that? As a low-ranking employee, you have no right to criticize me. I have no use for a woman like you. With that, he pulled out a prepared affidavit from a drawer. I hadn't realized he had it ready, but it worked to my advantage. I quickly signed the document, gathered my things, and left. Now, I had severed all ties with him. Feeling liberated, I headed to Mika's house, where she greeted me warmly. "You've worked hard. Now you're free." "Yes, I wouldn't have had the courage to divorce without your support. I'm really grateful." "Don't let your guard down. It's not over yet. He needs to face the consequences." "Absolutely and thoroughly." I hired a lawyer and filed a lawsuit against my ex-husband for moral harassment. He seemed quite flustered, clearly not expecting a legal battle. "Why me? And don't mess around." He erupted in anger. I was relieved to leave the details to my lawyer, avoiding direct confrontation with his outbursts. My lawyer methodically presented the facts and evidence, and eventually, my ex-husband seemed to resign himself to the situation. He had been blaming me for the divorce to his parents, but the lawsuit compelled them to seek the truth. Upon learning the full story, they were horrified and decided to disown him. Now that he had lost his support system, my ex-husband was left to figure out how to manage on his own. He continued living in the expensive apartment he had always coveted during his employment. Even after quitting his job, I had been transferring money to cover his rent. But now that we were divorced, he had to handle his living expenses, rent, and compensate me for his abusive behavior. With rent set at $1,000 a month and his income not sufficient, he was in dire straits and reached out to me for help. "Hello, what's the problem?" "Help me, I'm at a loss here." "Why should I help you? We have no obligations to each other anymore." "But we once loved each other, didn't we?" "That's unsettling." "What do you mean? Do you think you're entitled to forgiveness just like that? Do you realize how deeply you've hurt me?" "I'm sorry, I'll apologize properly." "An apology like that means nothing to me. Every time I apologize, you get all self-righteous. It's clear you have no respect for me. Just so you know, my salary has increased. I'm now earning more than you ever did as a full-time employee." "What? You used to belittle me for being in a lower position, but it turns out you were the one in a weaker position. Your contentment with a part-time job and failure to find a new full-time role only highlights your own shortcomings." "No way." My ex-husband was shattered to discover that he was now inferior to me, someone he had once looked down upon. "There's nothing more to discuss. If you contact me again, I'll report you to the police." "Hey, wait." I declared this firmly, ignoring his pleas and ending the call. I had already blocked his number and intended to sever all ties with him. Later, I learned from my former in-laws that he had settled his unpaid rent with a loan and moved out of his apartment. He is now working full-time and living in a more affordable place. Despite this, he continues to make alimony payments to me on time, indicating that he's working hard with a renewed sense of purpose. However, that doesn't mean I have any desire to reconcile. I am now living in a spacious new flat with my best friend Mika. We fill our days with fun, conversations, evening drinks, and a peaceful, fulfilling life. I am deeply grateful to Mika for her support and plan to give her a special gift as a token of my appreciation. Thank you all for being here to celebrate our wedding day. However, it appears there has been a mix-up. The room is filled with uneasy murmurs. An ominous feeling washes over me. To those seated over there, those who seem out of place, please excuse yourselves. You're blocking the view. My sister's voice echoed through the microphone as she smiled sweetly at us, seemingly unaware of the tension her comments were causing on her own special day. It was then that my husband stood up, walked to the bride and groom's table, and took the microphone from my sister. "Congratulations to the couple," he began, pausing as if to savor the moment. "As a toast to this special day, I have something to announce." He paused for effect before continuing with an unexpected declaration. "Our company, King Transport, is terminating all business dealings with Young Industries, effective immediately." Karen and her husband both visibly flinched at my husband's announcement. Let me introduce myself. My name is Karen. I'm 30 years old, and I lived with my mother and my older sister, Kale, until I got married. I have been happily married to Ted for 5 years now. Ted is 7 years my senior and a senior colleague at work. He is calm, dedicated to his job, and has always shown me immense kindness and sincerity. I trust him completely and was overjoyed when he proposed. While my life seems full of happiness now, my past was far from easy. When I was 16, my parents divorced because of my father's infidelity. My mother worked tirelessly to support us after that, but her health deteriorated while I was still in high school. At the time, Kea was in college, and I was deeply worried about our mother's well-being. Her constant exhaustion and the fear that she might collapse were always on my mind. Eventually, I decided to forgo college and start working right after high school. My academic performance had been strong, and I had always dreamed of furthering my education. However, my main concern was easing my mother's burden. Supporting the family alone was a daunting task, and while it wouldn't be easy, working would allow me to contribute financially and save on tuition costs. I shared my decision with my mother. "Don't worry about it. Just go to college. Your sister is going, and you want to go too, don't you?" she replied. "No, I'm okay. College is appealing, but I'm more concerned about you overworking yourself, Mom," I said. "But you've always been so dedicated to your studies. I can't believe you'd make such a sacrifice for me," she said. "Mom, this is my choice. It's not your fault. Please take care of yourself and don't push yourself too hard," I urged. With tears in her eyes, Mom responded, "I'm so grateful. I'm truly sorry." Since graduating high school, I've been focused on job hunting. With just a high school diploma, finding a suitable job proved to be quite challenging. However, my persistence paid off when a company saw my potential. I started working at King Transport, and I clearly remember the president's words during my interview. "We value enthusiasm and character above all. We have high expectations for you." Meanwhile, my sister Kiara, who had gone to college, was immersing herself in student life and seemed to be evolving with each passing day. "Mom, I won't be home for dinner tonight, and I won't be back until morning," she would announce, often staying out until dawn. One day, while I was enjoying a rare day off at home, Kiara came in, her expression tense. "Karen, aren't you supposed to be off work today? Could you please leave the house?" she asked sharply. I'm off, but what's going on?" I responded, puzzled. "My boyfriend is coming over today. He's very intelligent, and I prefer he doesn't find out that I have a sister who only graduated from high school." I was taken aback by her words, my shock momentarily overshadowing my anger. Mom and I had struggled to afford her college tuition, working tirelessly to make ends meet. Meanwhile, my sister seemed to be dismissing my own achievements and insulting me for not having a college degree. My frustration bubbled up, but I knew arguing wouldn't change her perspective. "All right, I'll leave the house for today," I said, trying to keep my composure and reminding myself that this was the path I had chosen. Afterwards, my sister began dating only attractive, well-educated men and lived a glamorous life focused on status and appearances. The sister I once knew, beautiful, popular, and charming, had changed. She seemed to be a different person altogether, flaunting her new relationships and belittling me for my lack of higher education. Each new boyfriend she introduced was a subject of bragging, and she increasingly mocked me as an uneducated and foolish woman. What motivated me was my clear goal of achieving independence for my mother. The support of my colleagues at work was also crucial. Initially, I felt like an outsider, a young female driver in a male-dominated transport company. I was an anomaly, and most of the female employees who were part-time workers or housewives kept their distance. Over time, however, their attitudes began to change. I was curious about why this shift occurred without any special effort on my part until one colleague approached me and said, "At first, we were a bit wary. We weren't sure what to expect." I laughed and shook my head. "Wary? Really?" He continued, "I know how hard you work and what a great person you are. Everyone here feels the same way. You've been doing an excellent job." That colleague is now my husband. His support has been a constant in my life. Eventually, our relationship blossomed into romance, and we got married. My sister, who had already graduated from college and moved away, was out of touch until a tragic event brought her back into my life. After my mother passed away suddenly from a myocardial infarction, my sister, relieved of her responsibilities, took charge of the funeral arrangements. It had been about 5 years since I last saw her. "It's been a long time, Karen," she said. "Yes, it has," I replied. "Is this your sister? And is this man your husband?" she asked, her eyes scanning my husband with a critical gaze. Her incredibly rude demeanor left me stunned. "Nice to meet you, Kiara. I'm Ted, Karen's husband. Please accept my deepest condolences," he said with genuine politeness. "What? Just a worthless man," she shot back dismissively. "Why would you say something so rude?" I demanded. "Be quiet. I heard you married an older man. Just some old guy, right?" "He's a very distinguished person," I countered. "And what does he do?" she asked, her tone as sharp as ever. It was typical of her to focus on someone's profession right after criticizing them. He works in the same field as I do, transport, but that's not the main concern today. Working in transport isn't exactly impressive. A guy in that industry probably doesn't earn much, right? You two must be struggling to make ends meet. It's kind of pathetic, she said dismissively. I chose this job. You don't know anything about our situation, so don't make assumptions, I retorted, my anger bubbling over. My husband placed a calming hand on my shoulder. Karen, today is about your mother. We shouldn't let a sibling argument overshadow it. It would only make her sad, he said gently. His words helped me regain my composure. I chose to disregard my sister's snide comments and focus on cherishing these final moments with our mother. My sister was clearly irritated by my indifference, but her complaints seemed trivial on such a significant day. As we sorted through Mom's belongings later, I was overwhelmed by the memories of her vibrant presence and comforting words, sinking into profound sadness. Through it all, my husband remained a steady source of support and encouragement. 2 years after Mom's passing, my husband said, Karen, we've received a wedding invitation. Really? I asked, surprised. It's for my sister, Kiara Young. I hadn't been in touch with her since the funeral, so hearing about her upcoming wedding was a shock. I'm not sure I'm ready to attend, I admitted. Maybe she's hoping to reconnect. You and she weren't always at odds, were you? He suggested. We used to be very close, I replied. You're both adults now. This could be an opportunity to mend things. I'll go with you. Let's take this chance, he encouraged. Encouraged by his support, I marked my attendance on the invitation the next day and sent it back. On the day of the wedding, I was surprised to learn that my sister's new husband was the president of Young Industries. That's impressive, my husband remarked. Really? I asked, intrigued. Absolutely. It's a major deal. The wedding is quite elaborate, and there are many guests, he said. As we made our way to the chapel and waited for the ceremony to begin, I watched my sister walk down the aisle in a stunning white wedding dress. She looked truly radiant, and I couldn't help but tear up with happiness for her. After the ceremony, as we were heading to the reception, we ran into my sister and her new husband. Nervous about this unexpected reunion, I approached them and extended my congratulations. Congratulations on your wedding. You looked absolutely beautiful today, I said warmly. My sister responded with an air of arrogance. I never expected you to actually show up. Is this your sister, Wyatt? The groom asked, eyeing my husband and me with a critical gaze. Yes, that's her. The sister with no education, my sister replied dismissively. Wyatt chuckled mockingly. Is this really her? She looks nothing like you. Rather plain, wouldn't you say? He then glanced coldly at me. And her husband seems like just another average guy. They probably settled for each other, he added with a sneer. Stop right there. It was the same at the funeral, but this is too much. Leave my husband out of this. I shot back, anger flaring. How pathetic. A high school graduate like you showing up here is such an inconvenience. Just leave, my sister snapped, her words dripping with disdain. If I'm such a bother, why invite me at all? My husband is a president, and I just wanted to celebrate our beautiful wedding with a grand affair. Meanwhile, you're stuck with a lackluster husband and a dull life. It must be frustrating for you, I replied. I just wanted to see that look of frustration on your face. It's awful that your husband came too. How cruel. Anyway, we're off to change outfits, so you high school graduates can leave now, she said with a sneer. With that, the couple walked away. Anger surged within me. I had worked so hard for my mother and sister, hoping to reconcile one day. To be insulted, along with my husband and my work, was unforgivable. Trembling with rage, my husband placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. Ted, it's all right, he said soothingly. Karen, you're amazing. Education doesn't define your worth. Your sister, who can't see that, is truly blind. But she insulted you and my work as well, I said, still upset. I can forgive her. Don't worry about it, I'll handle this, Ted said with a smile, though his eyes betrayed his deep anger. We made our way to the reception hall. When my sister and her husband reappeared in their new outfits, they looked displeased to see me still there. I remained calm and faced them as the reception began. During her speech, my sister made a shocking announcement. Thank you all for coming. However, it seems someone has mistakenly joined us. A murmur spread through the room. I felt a foreboding sense that something awful was about to happen. Those people sitting there, with their lack of education and unrefined appearance, do not belong in this beautiful celebration. Please leave, she declared into the microphone. I was stunned by her audacity, not expecting such rudeness at her own wedding. It was baffling how someone with such behavior could navigate social circles. My sister seemed completely unaware of the uncomfortable atmosphere she had created. Overcome with anger, I fixed her with a hard stare and said, "Can you hear me? Leave now." That's when my husband stood up and started walking toward the front. "What are you planning to do? Don't come over here," my sister protested. "Just go home," her husband added, clearly displeased with the interruption. Despite their objections, Ted pressed on, took the microphone, and addressed the guests. "Today, I want to extend my heartfelt congratulations to the newlyweds. However, there's something I need to address," he said firmly. "Who is this man?" someone whispered. "Effective immediately, we will be terminating our contract with Young Industries," Ted declared, his voice steady and resolute. My sister gasped in shock at Ted's announcement. One of Wyatt's relatives, visibly startled, stood up and asked, "Are you the president of King Transport?" The question came from Wyatt's father, who had handed over Young Industries to Wyatt 2 years earlier. My sister looked bewildered, unable to grasp the unfolding situation. "It's been a while, Mr. Young," she stammered. "Yes, I am the president of King Transport, and this is my wife Karen, the executive director," Ted confirmed. At that, Wyatt's guests, clearly affiliates of Young Industries, became visibly agitated. "Is this really happening? What does this mean? The president of King Transport? Karen is the executive director? This is unbelievable." As you heard earlier, the bride and groom made derogatory remarks about us, calling us uneducated and unsightly. In light of their wishes, we are terminating our contract with the groom's company and will no longer do business with them, my husband stated calmly. Wyatt's father turned pale, his face losing all color. Within moments, he flushed with anger and shouted, "Apologize to them right now." "Why are you so worked up, father? It's just a transport company. Is it really worth getting this upset?" my sister retorted scornfully. Meanwhile, Wyatt stood beside her, visibly trembling. "Wyatt, what's going on?" someone asked. In a panicked voice, Wyatt's father exclaimed, "King Transport is our exclusive carrier, handling our valuable cargo." "What?" My sister's face drained of color as the realization hit. "The president of King Transport is your husband. Ted's company is a major regional player with annual sales in the hundreds of millions. Since he hired me, I've dedicated myself to my work, driving reforms and incorporating on-site feedback. This hard work led to my promotion to executive director last year, thanks to strong recommendations from our team. If we cut ties with them, our products won't reach our customers starting tomorrow. This could severely damage our company's reputation and lead to significant financial losses." Hearing this, my sister's face went white with shock and fear, while Wyatt was in a panic, clutching his head. "I can't believe the president and executive director are involved and that King Transport is so crucial to our operations. This is disastrous. If shipping stops suddenly, it will erode trust with our partners and customers," Ted said, returning to my side with a calm demeanor. "We've offended such an important partner. Father, please help Wyatt," my sister pleaded. "Why were you so disrespectful to such a crucial carrier?" Wyatt's father demanded, his voice filled with frustration. "This mess is a result of your poor handling," Ted said, his tone firm. Wyatt, looking like a child in distress, turned to his father for help. His father grabbed him by the collar and dragged him to us, forcing him to apologize. "We sincerely apologize. Please, could you overlook this incident just this once?" Wyatt and his father both bowed their heads in earnest, pleading, "I am truly sorry. Please forgive us." Ted glanced at me, silently asking for guidance. I met his gaze and said calmly, "We cannot overlook this. Please confirm the necessary actions with headquarters tomorrow." Wyatt's guests gasped in shock at the direct announcement. Wyatt's father stood speechless, unable to find his words. I felt a deep sense of betrayal, having hoped that my sister might seek reconciliation. I was also disheartened by her husband's glaring incompetence as the president of Young Industries, failing to recognize a crucial business partner. My hopes were shattered. The wedding was abruptly canceled. The guests, including Wyatt, his father, and representatives from Young Industries, left the reception in a state of confusion and panic, scrambling to address the crisis. My sister's careless remarks had ruined her own wedding and left her in stunned silence. Big sister, you're on your own from now on. Don't ever show your face to us again. Her apologies, filled with regret, were now meaningless. My husband and I left the scene. In the aftermath, Wyatt was removed from his position as president by his father, losing both his status and wealth. His anger was directed at my sister, leading to endless conflicts that ended in their divorce. Meanwhile, my husband and I are eagerly anticipating the arrival of a new member in our family. My husband's family warmly supports us, celebrating our future together despite past hardships. We look forward to a joyful life with our baby. My name is Amy, and I'm 31 years old. I've been married to my husband, Scene, for 3 years, but we still don't have any children. We had envisioned owning a home and starting a family by now, but that dream seems to be slipping away. I've started to believe that Scene and his parents are contributing to our current situation. Despite our efforts to save money together, our savings haven't grown much. Scene often buys expensive branded gifts for his parents, and this habit has been a strain on our finances. Before we married, I knew Scene had a tradition of giving gifts to his parents, which I initially saw as a sign of respect. However, my perspective has shifted since we've been married. While his filial piety is admirable, his tendency to spend money recklessly has become more apparent. He seems to view our increased income as a green light for more extravagant spending. Where he used to stick to a budget, he now chooses only luxury items, and his parents have come to expect these costly gifts. They even request them for no particular reason, which I find difficult to understand. Scene has been secretly giving gifts to his parents, and discovering this has only fueled my growing resentment. While he shows unwavering dedication to his parents, he remains indifferent to mine. When I bring up my mother's upcoming birthday, his nonchalant response only adds to my frustration. The stark contrast between the gifts he lavishes on his parents and the modest ones I can afford for mine bothers me deeply. I sometimes wish I could give my parents expensive gifts, but our finances are stretched thin due to his spending. As a result, the gifts I manage to give them are always a compromise, falling short of what I'd like to offer. Although my parents appreciate what they receive, it pains me that I can't fully celebrate their special occasions. My dissatisfaction with Scene's one-sided concern for his parents is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. After a year of marriage, as I watched our savings stagnate, I began addressing Scene's spending habits. However, each time we discussed it, the conversation ended in his anger. He would accuse me of lacking sympathy for his parents or even of disliking them without truly hearing my concerns. Despite my repeated attempts to communicate, he never genuinely listened or showed any willingness to change. A few months ago, Scene bought his mother an expensive new wallet. When I confronted him about it, he defended the purchase by claiming her old wallet was worn out. But I knew the old wallet was one he had given her just a year earlier, and it didn't look worn to me. Realizing that my words weren't getting through to him, I decided to approach his parents directly. Considering our future, I felt it was crucial to address the issue directly with Scene's parents. With Scene present, I began by showing them the balance of our joint account. I pointed out how little our savings had grown since we got married, despite both of us working. As you can see, I said, we've hardly increased our savings since we began, even though we both contribute to the household income. My in-laws examined the bank statement with unreadable expressions while Scene appeared visibly displeased. Undeterred, I turned to him and asked Scene, do you remember the promise we made when we got married? We agreed to save money to build the house and start a family, right? He seemed to have a moment of realization and nodded, looking guilty. To get to the bottom of the issue, I pressed Scene further. Then why aren't you cooperating? Are you saying you don't want to build a house or have children? He shook his head vigorously, clearly disagreeing with that notion. Just as I was about to continue, my mother-in-law interrupted. Oh, so we're talking about building a house now. That sounds wonderful. I'd like our room to be in a sunny spot. My father-in-law quickly added, yes, we definitely need more space for our things. 2 rooms would be ideal. I was taken aback by this unexpected response. Seizing the moment, Scene became enthusiastic about the idea. All right, then let's make it 2 rooms. One for visits and another for storing clothes and belongings. Annoyed by their enthusiasm, I cut in, if we're adding 2 more rooms, that will increase our costs significantly. Therefore, we'll need to avoid any expensive gifts until the loan is paid off. My mother-in-law quickly backpedaled. Oh, it was just a joke. We rarely stay over at Scene's place anyway, right? My father-in-law chimed in. Exactly. Maintaining the smile, I firmly reiterated a decision I had made previously. I see it was a joke. However, for the sake of our future household and children, we'll need to limit gifts to birthdays and anniversaries only. Scene immediately protested. That's not fair to Mom and Dad. I had anticipated his reaction and responded with a look of disdain. Then your pocket money will be entirely cut off. We can't find any other way to tighten our budget. Or are you planning to use the money you saved when you were single to cover your parents' gifts? If that's the case, I won't interfere. Scene fell silent, his face sour. I let out a soft sigh, and with a bright smile directed at my in-laws who were searching for a response, said, I appreciate your understanding, as saving requires the effort of the entire family. They responded with reluctant nods, their faces still grim. It was clear that none of them, including Scene, were fully convinced, but I firmly closed the conversation, leaving no room for further discussion. After that discussion, Scene stopped giving extravagant gifts to his parents, and I noticed our joint bank account balance steadily increasing. I felt a sense of relief as our finances began to improve. However, this tranquility was short-lived. The turning point came when my sister gave birth. Being only a year younger, my sister and I have always been very close. Although our contact lessened after marriage, we still made an effort to keep in touch at least once a week. When she had the baby, she sent me a photo along with news of her joy and excitement. Perhaps I am biased because it's my niece, but the baby was truly adorable. I couldn't contain my excitement and immediately showed Scene the photo of the baby. His eyes softened as he was charmed by the baby's cuteness. I felt a wave of relief at his reaction. Although he had always said he liked children, I had my doubts about whether he truly meant it. I worried that his reluctance to save money was due to a lack of interest in having children. But from his reaction, it seemed he would cherish our future children as well. Feeling reassured, I remembered something and said to Scene, who was still admiring the photo, I've already sent my sister a gift and some money for the baby. His expression immediately darkened and he glared at me with clear dissatisfaction. You restrict gifts to my parents but spend so much on your sister, he said, clearly upset. As I stood there in shock, he continued to complain, and you sent it without discussing it with me. His self-righteousness made me lose my temper, and I responded sharply, how can you say that when you always secretly give gifts to your parents? This is for a baby's celebration, not for no reason at all. If you can't accept that, then let's agree to stop giving gifts entirely. I worried that I had overstepped, but the words were out, and I couldn't backtrack. Perhaps the idea of being forbidden from giving gifts was too much for him to accept, but he didn't argue further and fell silent. His face remained displeased, but I took it as a sign that he had reluctantly agreed. A few days after our argument, I received a call from my mother-in-law. As soon as I answered, she started with, I heard your sister had a baby. Realizing my husband had shared this news, I confirmed, yes, that's right. I expected her to offer congratulations or chat about the baby, but instead, she asked, so, I heard you gave her a present. Is that true? Taken aback by her directness, I replied, yes, I sent something for the baby. To my surprise, she responded cheerfully, well, I hope you'll have something for our anniversary next week too. I'm looking forward to it. Her request felt a bit impolite, but it was better than having Scene make an expensive purchase on his own. I agreed and ended the call. For my in-laws' anniversary, I decided to send a practical pair of glasses. I braced myself for a complaint, but none came, and time went by without incident. I had been too quick to judge my in-laws, but recent events made me realize my mistake. One day, my mother-in-law visited our home with a brand new luxury bag, beaming with delight. She admired the bag and thanked me, saying, "Thank you for the $4,000 bag." I was stunned, believing that our anniversary gift was merely a pair of glasses. I complained to Scene, "I feel awful about this." My shock left me barely able to whisper, but I chose not to address it with her at the time. She seemed oblivious to my reaction and cheerfully mentioned she was heading out to lunch with friends. After she left, I rushed to the bank. We had 3 accounts, individual accounts from before our marriage and a joint account we opened after tying the knot. The joint account showed no significant withdrawals, but checking our personal accounts revealed that $800 had been withdrawn from Scene's account and $4,000 from mine. When my husband came home, I confronted him about the missing money, but he dismissed my concerns. I thought it would be unfilial to give just glasses for the anniversary, so I used my account to cover Dad and yours to cover Mom, he explained. Seeing my anger, he grew flustered and insisted it wasn't a big deal since he hadn't touched the joint account. As I remained silent, his frustration mounted. Why would you only get glasses for the anniversary? I went out of my way to make sure both of them were covered, he argued. Realizing the conversation was going nowhere, I grabbed the carry bag I had packed earlier and quickly left the house. I could hear him shouting behind me, but I ignored it and walked away. When I arrived at my parents' house, they greeted me at the door, clearly surprised by my sudden return. My intention to divorce left them even more shocked, as I hadn't mentioned anything about it before. It must have come as a surprise. I explained the deep differences in values and thinking between my husband, his parents, and myself, detailing the recent incident with the luxury bag. I shared how my fear of my assets being misused led me to decide on divorce. My parents listened, understood, and supported my decision. Since I had already prepared for the divorce, filing the petition and arranging for a lawyer was straightforward. Once I confirmed that the affidavit had likely reached him, my husband began trying to contact me repeatedly. His voicemails filled up with messages, which I initially listened to. However, as his messages grew increasingly angry, I stopped listening and chose not to respond. The divorce proceedings with my husband went much smoother than I had anticipated, thanks to my thorough preparations. Since we worked in different departments of the same company, news of our divorce spread quickly. Although he attempted to claim that I left of my own accord, his lies were quickly disproven. I had already informed my boss and colleagues about my intention to divorce, along with the reasons and the issues with my husband and his family. Despite any false information he might have spread, my boss and colleagues, who knew the real story, promptly refuted it. My husband only made things worse for himself by propagating falsehoods. He faced cold stares from colleagues and was pressured by his boss to resolve the matter quickly. Given his naturally timid nature, it seemed he couldn't handle the pressure. Under increasing pressure, he agreed to the divorce. Unable to handle the hostile environment at work, he resigned and moved back in with his parents. However, things didn't improve there. Rumors about him and his parents had spread beyond the office, reaching our relatives as well, thanks to a family member who worked at the company. The reception was icy. Returning to his parents' home only further damaged his reputation. The neighborhood viewed him as someone who had been abandoned by his wife, and his parents, known for flaunting their luxury and looking down on others, only worsened the situation. Although the exact source of the leaks was unclear, the rumors circulated quickly. Facing disapproval and cold stares from those around them, my ex-husband and his parents lost their former arrogance and became notably subdued. Their once beloved collection of luxury goods came to an end when my ex-husband lost his income, forcing them to sell off their possessions. A relative who used to work with us informed me that the relationship between my ex-husband and his parents had become frosty, filled with mutual blame. I felt indifferent to this news. They had become irrelevant to me after our separation. I've been living stress-free and enjoying each day. The steady increase in my bank account, now that I'm no longer burdened with saving, brings me great joy. My enthusiasm for work has returned. Previously, my earnings were drained by gifts for my in-laws, which was disheartening, but that's no longer an issue. I've also been able to give my parents the gifts I truly wanted to, something I couldn't afford before. They initially said that what they had received was enough, but once I explained it was for my personal satisfaction, they happily accepted. Seeing their reaction lifted the guilt I had felt. As for love, I plan to take a break, but if the opportunity for remarriage arises, I hope to apply the lessons I've learned from these experiences.